Okay, so here we're in the little exhibition that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I'll begin it by saying that and actually there's supporting material in the wall text, so I won't go into a full-blown explanation of why I think this is such a rich area within Close's greater body of work. But at the time Chuck Close met Philip Glass, who was, Chuck Close was a struggling painter, Philip Glass was a struggling composer. Both were doing odd jobs. They met when Philip Glass came to do some plumbing work in their loft in Soho, and they were living in Soho at a time where now you go and it's boutique stores and wonderful restaurants and so forth. There's not really any galleries there anymore. But it was not a place that you wanted to be back in the late 1960s, and many of them were staying for very, very little rent money, and but enjoyed large spaces. And so Chuck Close got to know Philip Glass, and it turned out that he was one of the first of the large-scale black and white portraits. And over the years, Close has recycled that original photograph from what I think is a circa 1968. He has recycled that photograph time and time and time again. I think actually the most recent work in here might be this particular piece here, which I have to confess I'm not going to be able to speak with much authority about this particular work, but we're working on it. But you have Phil Spitbite here from 1995. And so in this space alone, you're seeing over 20 plus years of investigation, not going all the way back to the late 60s, mind you. But Philip Glass famously said that I am to Chuck Close as haystacks were to Monet, right? And if you've ever been to the wonderful Chicago Art Institute, you can go into that one gallery, and I think they have something like 4 or 5 of the original body of 25 or 26 haystacks that Monet did over the period of several months. And you see that idea of seriality, that idea of going back and investigating the same subject over and over and over again, to the point where the subject actually becomes somewhat secondary. It's more about the process of looking, the process of seeing, the process of interpreting. And every one of those compositions are so distinct in and of themselves. And to see an installation of those particular paintings is wonderful. You can spend time with one, then you spend time with the group, and it's just a remarkable experience. And to that, I think the same can be said with this particular investigation, exploration, recycling of this image of Philip Glass, who at the time was a struggling composer who was very experimental with his music. As I understand it, he has a strong presence here in the Monterey area, and thinking about him being this one particular image popping up time and time again, hence the name of this particular section, Glass Haystacks. And I love the notion of taking this particular idea and even expanding it even farther. But I think here we get a nice healthy dose of what Close is all about. And again, it's about that boundless experimentation, that fearlessness, which in many ways comes out of a youth that was that struggled to fit in and find his own voice at a time when learning disabilities were not, quite frankly, not diagnosed. And so he's famously said that he was a product of open enrollment. He was able to go to a state college in Washington State and study art, and then he got a scholarship to Yale. And he's famously said, if I didn't go to Yale, I would have wound up in jail. And so that just put him on a trajectory of being able to find a way to express himself that ultimately leads to something that, you know, stands alone in the history of art. So I'm particularly thrilled to be able to see this much of this particular subject in one space. And we were, Karen and I were talking about this very thing, and it actually came out of a conversation with your journalist for the local paper here, was this idea of a rhythmic progression. Very much what Philip Glass's work is all about, this kind of, this idea of the repeated image. And if you look in here and you think about crescendos and quiet spots, I think this space visually kind of echoes some of that, where you go through various visual groupings and you come up to something that's very bold and literally in your face, and then you have these more quiet moments in these areas here. Just a little bit about the fingerprint pieces. There's a couple examples downstairs. He sees that he's created a number of unique paintings using his fingerprint. In this case, I believe it's a lithograph process to transfer the fingerprint image to the paper here. And he sees something like as simple as a fingerprint being a unit of measure, just like his grid cells. But he's outside of that grid plane, right? I do want to say, we're going to gather in here on the last little piece I'm going to talk specifically about. I had the great honor of working with some donors some years ago and acquiring one of these Phil Spitbites for the collection at Davidson College. And, you know, at the time it was, you know, actually over the years it became more and more one of my favorite pieces. And again, thinking about his process, thinking about the way in which the challenges are brought to the various collaborators that he works with, in this piece alone, there's an untold number of hours of experimentation and research and development that goes into producing something as seemingly simple as this, but in fact it is the product of individual steps that are meticulously carried out over the period of several weeks. Just quickly, obviously a grid was etched on to the nickel plate to begin with, right, or copper for that matter. They're 1/4-inch squares. And the Spitbite process, you're not just using an acid to bite or eat down into the plate. You're actually suspending that in a thick liquid, something like a Karo syrup or something along those lines. And by the amount that you distribute the acid to solution mixture, you can control how much that burns down into the plate. Oftentimes you take it and you might even brush it on with a brush. But in this case, using an eyedropper and a system that allowed them to know where the light marks go and where the darkest marks go, they were able to go through, and of course the gridded plate is sitting on a flat surface. And you say, okay, here, quadrant 1A is going to be the lightest value. So they take the solution with the least amount of acid in it, they put it, drop it right there, and they time it with a stopwatch. And so it might stay on there for 3 seconds, right? But by the time you go through this, and you're getting to the absolute darkest values, which might be 8 different values of gray, from the lightest to the absolute almost black, you might have that drop of acid in there for 1.5 minutes. So the longer that acid and solution mixture stays on there, the more it's eating down into the plate. Therefore, that's going to actually pick up more ink as you ink up your plate. So the deeper the groove, the darker your line. That goes for if you're even creating a dry point etching where you're scratching the plate with a burnishing tool or a stylus.
So he must have experimented on a separate. Many.
You
know how many seconds to leave it on?
Many, many, many. Yeah, so the amount of R&D that goes into something like this, again, it's mind-boggling. But for me, I love it. I love the scale. I love the feel of it. I love the fact that they added, I think, just a little bit of blue to the black ink. You know, there's something about it that has this kind of this bluish quality to it. So that's the one I'm taking home, Michael. Just so you know.